Welcome to Teal Talk, an ovarian cancer podcast, produced by the National Ovarian Cancer Coalition. You'll hear from medical professionals, survivors, and advocates to help guide you with knowledge, confidence, and support on your journey. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media at NOCC National.
This episode of Teal Talk is made possible thanks to the support of people like you and our generous sponsors, GSK, AstraZeneca, AZI, and City of Hope.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Taylor. Today's conversation touches on a deeply personal and often overlooked aspect of the cancer experience. I'm honored to be joined by Alexandria Callahan, a clinical sexologist and behavioral health manager from City of Hope. Alexandria, we often hear about body image concerns after surgery. Can you please share how physical changes can impact someone emotionally and change how they see themselves?
So there's so many physical changes that happen. And a lot of times you look in the mirror and you don't recognize that person in front of you. Besides the hair loss, skin pigmentation can change. I have a lot of patients that have said, I didn't realize that my hands are going to get darker or they're lighter or my skin's blotchy now. There's that weight gain or loss, muscle tone shifts, even having scars from surgeries and procedures. And we don't really think about all of those things. You think, okay, I'm going through chemo, I'm going to lose my hair. But the impact of it can be so detrimental for patients. And even that weight gain or loss, I've had patients that have joked around about, this isn't the diet I wanted to go on, but now I'm losing weight and I can fit into those clothes I used to wear in high school. On the flip side, though, I've had some patients say, I've been a size 12 my entire life, and now I've lost weight and I don't fit into my favorite clothes. I don't feel confident in my body anymore. So it's interesting to see how that weight loss for some people can be amazing, and others are like, nope, this doesn't work for me. And then the other way too, if they're on any kind of steroid and they're gaining weight, they're looking at themselves, say, okay, I've lost my hair, all these other things are changing, and now I'm gaining weight. I can't even wear my favorite clothes. I have to wear sweatpants now. And although they're comfortable, I don't want to go out into public like that. And that takes a huge emotional toll on people, especially when they are viewing themselves as a stranger. They don't know their body anymore. Things don't feel as good. They're not feeling as sexy or attractive. A lot of the women won't let their partners touch them anymore. They said, I don't feel good about myself. I don't want them touching me. And it takes a lot of work just in those conversations to help them find that confidence, to find some beauty within themselves, and definitely letting go of that negative self-talk that they have.
That negative self-talk can really be overpowering, overwhelming. Some survivors have shared that they disconnect from that part of their body. How do we begin to redefine beauty and sexuality after treatment?
That's an excellent question. As I was working with patients, I was like, oh, let me see what the world thinks of beauty and sexuality. And I was shocked. When you do a Google image search of beauty, all these different makeup products come up. And when you do a search of sexy, you get very busty women wearing revealing clothing that doesn't leave much up to the imagination, or the pictures are censored. You're going through a cancer treatment and your body's shifting and changing, and you see all of these different images in your face. And that's what beauty and sexuality are supposed to look like. It can be really disconcerting. And I think that plays into that negative self-talk too. So being able to look at yourself in the mirror and think about the story that you're telling yourself about you is very important, because we write our own scripts. So if you're looking at yourself every day saying, oh, you're ugly, you don't have that perfect body anymore, you have all these scars, no one's going to find you attractive, you're going to start believing that, and that's going to become your story, your truth. Those are all learned behaviors. So it's learning to unlearn those and say, okay, I've gone through this incredible journey. I'm on the other side. I'm a survivor, especially with ovarian cancer. The survivor rate, we praise that, especially when you get to the other side and you're saying, okay, I've made it through that hardest part. I have an inner strength that other people don't have. They didn't go through this fight. They didn't have that fear of mortality. I think we go through life thinking we're invincible, and then something like this happens and you're just like, whoa, okay, there is something that can actually harm my body. So it is being able to boost that confidence and explore what it feels like to move in this new body. How do you connect to it? I think movement is an amazing way to start to ground yourself and get that reconnection and say, okay, my arms are moving differently. I had this huge abdominal surgery. So the things that I used to feel supported in, I have to work at a little bit more. And that can be a fun experiment too, to say, okay, how is my body moving and what does it look like now after these surgeries and things? I've had some patients say they look at their scars as their battle wounds and it's almost like a shield of pride for them. I made it through. I've got this battle wound to prove it. And, I'm going to go flaunt it. And one patient, she's, yeah, but I'm wearing the bikini. I want everyone to see the fight that I went through in that way. So it is figuring out how you're presenting yourself, what clothing makes you feel good, especially as you're going through treatments and looking at the way you interact with people.
It's about recognizing your own self-worth, being gracious and kind to yourself about the changes that did occur, and some great tips that you did share. So thank you for that. Alexandria, unfortunately, many people feel too embarrassed or ashamed to bring up these issues with their providers. Why do you think that is?
There's definitely a lot of stigma around sex and sexuality and sexual health as being a taboo subject. And there's a lot of religious and cultural views on sex and sexuality. So it's not as clear cut as I'm going into the doctor's office with pain. The doctors are like, all right, pain, we know what to do. We'll send you to the pain team or we'll give you a prescription to help with that. With the sexual health piece, though, there's embarrassment there. If your providers aren't 100% comfortable talking about it, they tend to not bring it up. And if the patient is embarrassed or scared to bring something up or thinks that there's something wrong with me, then it's just not being talked about. And that's the unfortunate piece and definitely a disservice, especially when you're dealing with ovarian cancer. We're right there in one of those main areas that is part of that sexual health and well being. So it's definitely making sure that you are bringing it to the healthcare providers or the providers themselves are initiating some of that conversation and even sending those referrals. What's great here with City of Hope, we have our physicians, they know that there's a sexual health team. So even if they're not comfortable talking about it, they're like, oh, we know who can talk to you about this. So it's getting those conversations happening. And we've had a lot of patients that have reported if their provider doesn't ask them, then they don't say anything either because they feel like, oh, it's not anything I have to worry about. Or it gets blown off. I've had some patients that they've talked with their gynecologist and like, that's just a symptom of menopause. That happens to everybody. So it gets brushed aside versus there's something we can do to help you with that.
And Alexandria, you bring up such a valid point because it is very uncomfortable for a lot of women to approach this subject matter with their healthcare providers, and they oftentimes feel dismissed. So they will just internalize everything. What advice then would you give to somebody to help them start that conversation?
It's really advocating for yourself as a patient. So asking those direct questions of your providers. If you don't say anything, then there's not an issue. So you're just dealing with it. I really encourage patients to ask for referrals for a specialist in sexual health. If your provider doesn't know the answer or seems uncomfortable engaging in the topic, saying, where can I go? Who can help me with this piece? Remembering that there are many solutions to improve the quality of life for common sexual health issues that often get overlooked. So it's saying, hey, you know what? I'm having sex and it's painful. And yeah, I listened to this podcast and they said sex should never be painful. So it's saying, what can we do then? How can I make that not be the norm for myself? How can I go back to reclaiming your body, finding pleasure? That's an important thing too. And something that is often brushed aside just because the focus is on you got to get through the cancer treatment. You don't have to worry about that. You're not having sex right now. It's not just about sex, it's about the quality of life and being able to have that sexual health piece in there.
You deserve a better quality of life. So let's shift to the emotional journey. Cancer is traumatic, and that trauma can linger, can even become paralyzing. How does this impact sexual health and intimacy long term?
So the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn is a response to trauma. So I typically give the example if you're walking through the woods and a bear comes up to you. Some people are going to freeze. They're just going to freak out and some are going to run. So there's that flight mechanism. I don't know many people that will try to fight the bear with the fawn, which is actually newer in research. Fawn is more kind of like Stockholm syndrome, where you just give in and you're working with that stressful situation as a mode of survival. So when we look at that in return of cancer, we have some people that they put their boxing gloves on. They're like, all right, I'm just pushing through. They're ignoring all the emotions, ignoring any of the changes. They're like, I just got to get through treatment. I'm getting from point A to point B, and that's it. So those are our fighters. The flight people go into a denial. They're just like, all right, you know what? I don't even know if I have cancer. I'm not even using that word. We're not acknowledging it. There's the freezing piece too, where they're numb just emotionally. So they're going through the motions almost on autopilot. And then the fun piece, it doesn't necessarily go into cancer treatment. I would say that's more if you're medically naive and you're not asking those questions, you're not advocating for yourself. You're just saying, okay, I'm just trying to survive. So they told me I need to do this. So that's what I'm going to do versus having some of that questioning. And a lot of people are afraid to question or bring things up to their doctors because the doctors are the ones that are essentially there to help save their lives. And that all happens with the trauma piece too. We know that trauma impacts your body and your mind, and how we cope with things looks very different. For some patients, we notice an increase in their anxiety or depressive symptoms, and that too will impact your sexual health and intimacy. If you're highly anxious or in survivor mode, all the blood is rushing to your brain. The cortisol is pumping through your system. The last thing you're thinking about is, oh, I want to be intimate, or I feel aroused, or I have this desire to be with my partner right now, because your body is not there. That's important to recognize. So, because if we're in that constant state of stress, we're doing a disservice to our body. We talk a lot, and I know we'll probably talk later too about that self-care piece and the importance in that to help regulate that stress and get us out of that trauma state so that we can be more present with our bodies. And that way it'll help you be more in tune to the changes they're experiencing, whether it's physical changes or emotional shifts.
So there are a lot of emotional struggle that the patient is going through. You talk about the stress affecting intimacy and your relationship. What else could somebody struggle with in terms of their intimate relationships with their partners because of the emotional changes?
There's definitely a loss in their identity. If you're a mother or a wife and you're going through treatment and now all of a sudden your spouse, your kids, they're taking care of you. So there's a lot of changes in those roles, especially with the spousal role. When you're a patient and you have your spouse as your caregiver, a lot of times we lose that husband wife or wife role relationship. And it's really important to keep that intact. And it can be challenging, especially if you have a treatment that makes you really sick and this person's like, they're trying to hand feed you, or they're holding your hair as you're throwing up, or they're watching your hair as it's falling out, and that emotional toll that it takes. So it is really interesting to see those shifts in dynamics and how we can bring the couple back to being a couple rather than the patient and the caregiver.
Alexandria, there's a great framework you shared around sexual breaks and accelerators. Can you explain what those are and how they apply to someone after cancer?
So the brakes and accelerators we got from Dr. Emily Nagowski, who has the book Come As You Are. And it's a great book for relearning, especially for the female, about your body. I always say share it with the male partners too, so they understand as well. The brakes and accelerators are really anything you can touch, taste, see, smell, hear, feel, think, or imagine. And so basically everything around you. And there's no right or wrong for what you experience. And your brakes are the things that put you back. Say, like, all right, no, I'm not going to be intimate. They literally halt you. And the accelerators are the things that drive you. Especially going through cancer treatment, a lot of the common breaks that we see are around body image, increased stress, pain, nausea, that caregiving role, sleep deprivation, the medically induced things like menopause. Our brain is our largest sex organ. So if we can get it into a relaxed state, then you're able to be more present and that intimacy can come. We always say, talk with your partner about sex outside of the bedroom so that you can express those concerns, those fears, so that you can then have that intimacy when you're in the bedroom.
Great key points to make the whole situation more approachable, less intimidating. Communication can feel awkward when it comes to intimacy. What tips do you have for having those important conversations with a partner?
It can be really challenging to talk about sex and pleasure and those physical changes, especially as you're going through cancer treatments. To start those conversations, we live in the age of technology. Send a text message about, hey, I'm thinking about you, or I'd like to have this conversation about this. So the other person can be prepared or write a letter. One thing I tell people to do is play a game, bring an old board game out and let the conversation just happen organically. It lends its way to having those challenging conversations and it doesn't feel as stressful versus sitting next to each other on a couch looking at each other awkwardly. And then finding ways to spice up the romance a little bit, especially when you have that low desire. How do you get into the mood? That's where text messages can happen or planning a date night. We have a lot of patients that they're so overwhelmed with the doctor's appointments and the scans and the treatment. Like that's their full time job. And then they have that disconnect from their partner. So it's saying, all right, Thursday night's our date night. We don't have cancer as a topic of conversation. The kids are off the table, work's off the table. We're just going to talk about each other. We're going to get to know each other and even having fun planning those different dates. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. I've told a lot of people have a picnic in the middle of your living room or get the popcorn out, have a movie date, something simple like that, or going to a park, going for a walk. It doesn't even have to be around food. It's just making sure that you have that time to truly be present and connect with each other.
It's important for survivors to make themselves a priority. If there's one thing you want listeners to remember, what would it be?
I would say to give yourself grace throughout this process. There's so many changes that happen to your body, to your relationship with yourself, with others. And there's grieving that happens with that too. It's important to give yourself, your body that space to grieve as you're relearning who you are now and redefining yourself as a person.
It is so important to realize you don't have to go through this situation alone. If today's conversation resonated with you, you're not alone. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Teal Talk. We'd love your feedback. Take our quick survey linked in the description or drop a comment with your questions and topic suggestions. For more information about the National Ovarian Cancer Coalition and our mission, visit ovarian.org. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and take care.